It was common knowledge that Lucas Ryan had wed me solely out of resentment, unable to be with the woman he truly adored. Throughout our 5-year union, he played the role of the ideal spouse in public, a celebrated heart specialist admired by many. However, within the confines of our home, he was aloof and detached, frequently requesting a divorce. Then Evelyn Snow, his first love, came back to the country due to health issues. Lucas dedicated himself to her care, rarely leaving her side. He even cautioned me repeatedly, Eve's heart condition is fragile. If you dare appear and cause her stress, our marriage is over for good. At last, during his 100th plea for a divorce, I conceded. What Lucas was unaware of, though, was that I was already expecting his child. En route to the courthouse to complete the divorce proceedings, I was involved in a vehicular collision. My life and that of my unborn baby were extinguished in a moment. Lucas didn't receive the divorce papers that day, but he did get word that Evelyn had found an ideal heart donor match. Elated, he hurried back to the medical center and conducted the operation himself, extracting the heart from my lifeless form and implanting it into hers. It wasn't until afterwards that he recalled our divorce, but by then, my phone would never ring again. The agony finally ceased when my spirit departed from my body. I drifted above the scene, observing the wrecked vehicle smoldering in the downpour. The driver's seat was compressed beyond recognition, and the body slumped within was contorted and shattered in every conceivable way. This day was meant to commemorate our 5th wedding anniversary. Ironically, it was also when Lucas demanded a divorce for the 100th time. Over the years, I had attempted to disregard the fissures in our delicate relationship, hoping that somehow we'd make it work. But this time, I finally agreed to let go. Half a decade is a considerable span, even if most of it was characterized by distance and tension. Regardless of how things were, we'd spent a significant portion of our lives together. But everything shifted a month ago when Evelyn returned from abroad, her health declining. From that point on, Lucas never came home. He remained at the hospital, tirelessly caring for her. Everyone was aware that he had married me out of anger and heartbreak after Evelyn rejected him. But I had loved him for years, long before he even knew my name. So, even when I discovered the truth, I stayed. Loving him was as instinctive as breathing, no matter how much it hurt. My thoughts returned to the present as I watched the ambulance from St. Mercy's Hospital load my broken body into the back. I followed instinctively. Lucas worked at St. Mercy's, where he was a renowned cardiologist. Patients and staff revered him. Yet, as his wife, I couldn't even approach him for a minor ailment. On our wedding day, he had made it clear, I don't want to see you at my workplace. And don't trouble me with trivial matters. That's why I never informed him of my pregnancy. As I hovered above the ambulance, my hand drifted to my abdomen. The life I had carried, the one I had dreamed of for years, was gone now, just like me. Tears flowed down my face, silent and unending, as an ache settled deep in my chest. That child was supposed to be my miracle, my hope after 5 long years. My body wasn't taken to the morgue. Instead, it was wheeled into the operating room on the 5th floor. The door to the operating room opened, and 2 figures entered. Dr. Ryan, this isn't legal without the family's consent. The voice belonged to Mason, Lucas's protege. I knew him well. Over the years, he had consumed countless meals I'd brought for Lucas. Evelyn scoffed and folded her arms as she approached my lifeless body. She glanced at me before quickly turning her head, unable to conceal the revulsion in her eyes. I've waited far too long for a compatible heart. I'm not about to let this opportunity slip away, she said coldly. Then, without hesitation, she turned to Mason. Call Lucas. Tell him to come back and perform the surgery himself. Mason hesitated, shifting uncomfortably on his feet. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but said nothing. Evelyn extracted a card from her purse and handed it to him. There's 50 grand on this card. This stays between us. No one has to know. Mason stared at the card, torn between guilt and greed. Finally, after a long pause, he took it and dialed Lucas. The phone rang a few times before Lucas's voice filled the room. What is it? He asked, sounding impatient. Mason glanced at Evelyn before answering softly. Dr. Ryan, we found a suitable donor for Evelyn. The body is in the operating room. You should come back. The indifference in Lucas's voice evaporated, replaced by palpable excitement. Are you serious? I'll be there right away. Eve won't have to worry about this anymore. His voice was jubilant, overflowing with relief and joy. Each word felt like a dagger to my chest. My tears blurred everything as I looked at the operating table where my body lay. If Lucas knew it was my heart he was about to take, would he still sound so happy? Lucas Ryan returned to the hospital in less than half an hour. He rushed down the corridor, panting, and embraced Evelyn Snow. His voice brimming with happiness and relief, he exclaimed, Evelyn, you're going to be all right at last. Evelyn's eyes became misty, and she nestled against his chest, her voice quavering as she murmured, Lucas, without you, I wouldn't even desire this heart. I'd be ready to give up. Lucas held her tighter, softly kissing her forehead. His voice was filled with an unshakable vow, don't fret. I'll end my marriage with Claire soon. I only wed her because I was cross with you. Although this seemed to be common knowledge, hearing it from Lucas himself still sent a pang through my heart. This was the depth of his affection for Evelyn Snow. Even after 5 years, I had failed to thaw the ice encasing his heart. The pain in my chest intensified as Lucas reassured Evelyn, instructing her to prepare for the operation. He then entered the surgery room with Mason to get ready. For Lucas, performing a heart transplant was a mere routine. It was a procedure he could carry out blindfolded. However, when he saw the blood-covered body on the operating table, he couldn't help but grimace. "Mason, why wasn't this cleaned before being brought in?" he inquired sharply. Mason hesitated, avoiding Lucas's gaze nervously. He stuttered, "Dr. Ryan, Evelyn's match is incredibly rare. And, well, preserving the heart's freshness was the main concern." Lucas didn't immediately respond. Instead, he took the scalpel from Mason and prepared to begin. But just as he was about to make the first cut, he paused. I followed his gaze and realized he was fixated on my left hand. There, on my ring finger, was the diamond wedding band I had created myself. The blood covering it only made it more conspicuous. I had even crafted a matching ring for Lucas for our wedding, but he had despised it. On our wedding day, he had locked it away in a drawer, never to wear it again. "What's the matter, Dr. Ryan?" Mason asked, puzzled by his hesitation. Lucas shook his head but spoke with a hint of remorse in his voice. "She was unfortunate. Her spouse must be heartbroken." As he said this, he made the incision, opening my chest. Mason stood beside him, handing him instruments as needed. At one point, he added, "And, after conducting the tests, we discovered she was 2 months pregnant. Truly tragic when you consider it." This time, Lucas remained silent. The atmosphere in the room grew more somber, as if an invisible burden was weighing everyone down. I observed him from afar, memories rushing back. Last winter, I fell severely ill. My temperature was so high I couldn't even leave my bed. Lucas was home that night, but he barely noticed. He was too engrossed in writing a paper for a medical journal. I spent the entire night alternating between chills and fever, too weak to call for help. When I was finally rushed to the hospital, the doctors said I had barely escaped death. When I finally regained consciousness, Lucas's first action was to reprimand me. "You're a grown-up. If you're feeling this awful, why didn't you speak up?" His eyes were icy, filled with fury. "Or was this your method of seeking my attention?" I lacked the energy to argue with him. I wanted to remind him that he had always instructed me not to disturb him, even when I was ill. I had been nothing but compliant, so why was he still furious? Now, standing in this operating room, I couldn't help but wonder, how could Lucas show empathy for a stranger but be so cruel towards me, the woman who had stood by him for 5 years? The heart transplant was a success. After 6 hours, it began beating anew, this time within Evelyn Snow's chest. As soon as Lucas Ryan exited the surgery room, he made his way directly to Evelyn's recovery area. He stood beside her bed, observing her tranquil slumber. Only then did he exhale deeply, feeling the tension leave his body. Once he was confident Evelyn was in stable condition, Lucas headed back to his office. He collapsed into his chair and reached for his phone, only to find the display empty, no texts, no missed calls. It felt odd. I used to bombard him with messages throughout the day, sharing every trivial aspect of my life, my meals, my work, my daily experiences. But Lucas never replied. Not even once. He gazed at his phone for a moment, then accessed his contact list. His finger lingered over my name before he paused, but eventually, he initiated the call. The phone rang repeatedly, the mechanical sound piercing the quiet, until it cut off automatically. There was no one to answer on the other end. Exasperated, Lucas set the phone down, opened our previous conversation, and recorded 2 voice messages, his annoyance evident. "Claire, you've already agreed to end our marriage. Whether you pick up or not won't alter my decision. And don't think that playing coy will make me change my mind." I observed him send the messages in anger, a faint, bitter smile crossing my face. "Lucas Ryan," I whispered softly, "if you loved me this much, why did you ever marry me?" But it was irrelevant now. The wife he detested had perished in today's tempest. He would never have to deal with me again. For the first time, Lucas's messages vanished into nothingness, unanswered. I disappeared from his life, silently and without a trace. Yet, he didn't search for me. He presumed I was being difficult, hiding because I opposed the divorce. He was so convinced of this that he never questioned my absence. Meanwhile, my lifeless form remained unclaimed in the hospital's morgue. It wasn't unexpected. After all, I had no family. Raised in a group home, I had no relatives to call my own. My sole notable achievement in life was securing a place at one of the nation's leading design institutions. And, of course, becoming Lucas Ryan's wife. During our college years, Lucas wasn't just a standout in medical school, he was the epitome of success. Top academic performer, incredibly attractive, and seemingly unreachable, he was the object of every girl's desire on campus. Even at my school in another part of town, everyone had heard about the perfect romance between Lucas Ryan and Evelyn Snow. I first laid eyes on him at a joint event between our universities. He stood out in the crowd, wearing an expertly tailored suit that exuded wealth and sophistication. He conversed with natural charisma, surrounded by people who appeared drawn to him like moths to a flame. His presence was so captivating, it was almost overwhelming. That evening, I found myself trapped by an intoxicated individual who refused to leave me be. It was Lucas who intervened, extracting me from the predicament. My typically composed heart fluttered for the first time. Yet I understood the reality. Lucas Ryan existed in a different sphere from mine. He was beyond my reach, and moreover, he was with Evelyn. Thus, I suppressed my emotions deeply, satisfied to observe him from afar. I believed it to be an unrealistic fantasy. Those like myself, who had struggled to rise above their circumstances, had no right to aspire to someone of his caliber. I assumed that would be our sole encounter. However, destiny had alternative plans. Lucas and Evelyn eventually parted ways. The reason was unknown to me, and I felt it wasn't my place to inquire. On a bright afternoon, I happened to be delivering bespoke cufflinks to one of Lucas's acquaintances. Lucas was present, standing near the window, illuminated by golden sunlight. He turned his gaze towards me, his expression calm and detached, and posed a question that would alter everything. Would you consider marrying me? Is Claire still not responding to her phone? In the hospital chamber, Evelyn Snow's already pallid complexion grew even more wan. Her eyes reddened, and tears cascaded down her cheeks as she looked at Lucas Ryan, her voice quavering. Lucas, during your 5-year marriage to her, did you truly never harbor any feelings for her? Not even once? Her voice cracked as she continued, her emotions unraveling. Is she genuinely missing, or are you deceiving me? Was this all a ruse because you never actually intended to marry me? Because you never forgave my departure back then? As she finished speaking, Evelyn erupted into heartrending sobs. I stood quietly by the window, leaning against the frame, observing them. My emotions had strangely stabilized over the past few days. I wasn't even angry anymore. I had anticipated this. I presumed Lucas would embrace her, comforting her as he always did. And indeed, a moment later, he frowned, rose, and enveloped the trembling Evelyn in a reassuring hug. See? I guessed correctly. Claire consented to the divorce, he stated calmly, patting Evelyn's back as if to reassure her. I'm unsure why she suddenly vanished, but don't fret. I'll proceed with the divorce. And then I'll wed you. Just as those words left his mouth, hurried footsteps resonated down the corridor. Before Lucas could react, 2 uniformed police officers entered the room. Lucas froze, his brow furrowing in bewilderment. Officers, is there an issue? Before the police could respond, the door burst open once more. Mason stumbled in, gasping for breath, his face ashen as he stammered, Dr. Ryan. See Claire. Claire is deceased.